come death, the destroyer of worlds.
Christopher Nolan has undoubtedly made some of the best movies of the 21st century. And now he's telling the story of a man who, for better or worse, changed the world. J. Robert Oppenheimer. Enter the captivating world of Oppenheimer, where Nolan's directorial prowess brings history to life on the silver screen.
8, 7, 6.
In a movie like no other. When I initially left the movie theater after watching Oppenheimer just a couple of days ago, I didn't really know what to make of it initially, because there was so much to take in, there was so much to consider with this movie, there was so much hype and hyperbole around the movie that all flooded into my brain all at once, and immediately I started asking the question, was it deserving of it? And I didn't want to rush this review. I didn't want to come in here cold-cocked and just spew a lot of stuff about the movie, good, bad or indifferent. I want to take time, let the movie stew in my brain, research the reasons why Nolan did certain things, look at as many interviews as I could with the cast and the director, of course, Christopher Nolan, constantly listen to the soundtrack because it's one of the best parts of the movie, and research as much as I could about the movie, because this is a fascinating movie in so many elements.
They won't fear it until they understand it. And they won't understand it until they've used it.
A fascinating story, very well told by perhaps the only filmmaker right now who could make it. That's up for debate, of course. You know, you've got Spielberg and other directors. And that's the thing with this movie. No CGI, very little CGI. No CGI. No CGI. That's what it is. Christopher Nolan said he took CGI off the table.
I wanted to take CG off the table and see if, you know, he could come up with real world methodologies for producing the effect of, you know, the first atomic blast. But even more than that, I wanted him to see how we were going to try and look into Oppenheimer's mind and see his thought process of, you know, as I put it, sort of looking into dull matter and seeing energy there and seeing the potential of the strong force there to be unleashed on.
Fascinating when you take into account all the little elements of fire and flame and explosion throughout the movie. All those little scenes are practical effects in some way, shape or form. And then of course you've got the Trinity test in itself, which was reportedly an actual bomb, which is insane. How did he pull that off? Who knows? Now, as I mentioned, hype and hyperbole is abundant with this movie. I've seen people say the greatest movie of the 21st century. I've seen people say Christopher Nolan's greatest ever movie. You know, that's all up for debate. Do I think it's the greatest movie of the 21st century? No, but I do think it's a very good movie, and the more I don't watch it, the better the movie gets. That's a strange sentence, but hopefully I can elaborate more in the review. And what I've been doing more recently here on the channel is I've been doing a review and then a spoiler review so that, you know, we can talk a little bit more in depth about the movie. For a movie like this, based in history, based about a real person, based on fact, it seems a bit redundant to do a spoiler review. So there will be spoilers in the review, but I'll try to keep them towards later in the video. But what I will say is probably what everyone else is saying about the movie. The performances are absolutely stunning. Some of the visuals in the movie are sensational. The sound design is one of the greatest sound designs in the history of movies. It just is. This is a movie that's probably going to take a few viewings till you actually, you know, realize everything that's going on in the movie, all the little subtleties. Cillian Murphy in particular, fellow Irishman, great to see him in a big lead role and one of the biggest lead roles of the year, and just absolutely killing it. His performance is sensational. Even the likes of Matt Damon and Robert Downey Jr., who in their own are fantastic in the movie, have nothing but high praise for Cillian Murphy's performance.
Be part of a movie that's telling that story with a director who's at the absolute height of his abilities, you know, with a chance to support that performance, which to me is one of the great performances I've ever seen on screen, was thrilling.
There's English modesty, and then there's Irish Cillian. It's been really difficult to try to get through to you what an amazing thing you accomplished. And I know it's important for us to kind of separate from that because that's not what matters, but well done, brother.
Thanks, man. We all did it.
But on top of that, he's got an astounding cast. Matt Damon, Robert Downey Jr. Matt Damon is fantastic in his role, and Robert Downey Jr. is blowing people away with his performance because people kind of forgot that Robert Downey Jr. is a phenomenal actor.
Did you love me? Ever?
Go. I said go. Go.
Dad, did you love me or not? Daddy, I gotta know. Come on, lie to me and tell me you did. Let me feel like the piece of shit I am. Did you love me or not? Answer me!
Father always.
Not a father, you!
10 years of Iron Man will do that to a guy. But then on top of that, you've got Emily Blunt. And Emily Blunt is a phenomenal actress. She's been in some great movies, and she delivers my favorite line of the movie. One of my favorite lines of the movie. I wrote down because up here, not good for remembering things. The line was, "You don't get to commit sin and have us all feel sorry for you when you suffer the consequences." And that was just a phenomenal line that stuck with me all the way through the movie. It wasn't at the beginning, it was like towards the endish, middle endish. That little line stuck with me throughout the movie because it does come back to pay dividends to Oppenheimer.
Everything he said post 1945, he was a very eloquent man. He's incredibly careful. He never apologized for the bombings of Japan. He never expressed individual shame about his role in it or anything like that. But all of his actions and policy decisions or attempts to influence policy post 1945 are those of a deeply guilty man, very aware of the consequences of his actions.
The writing in this, of course, is fantastic. Christopher Nolan has written it based on a book called American Prometheus. And Christopher Nolan's writing is pretty damn strong, as we've seen down the years. He just knows how to make a great movie. That's something that rings across all of the interviews from all of the cast of the movie. They all have nothing but high praise for Christopher Nolan, the people that worked on him before and the people that have just begun working with him.
It's one of those days where sort of, I think we were losing the light, and it was like, but Chris doesn't kind of let you feel the chaos.
I think I came in a bit heavy in that scene, and you said to me, Kill, he's not a boxer, he's a chess player. That's just an example of one of the unbelievably brilliant...
Which gives you total permission. I actually
Exactly.
negotiated in couples therapy, this is a true story, the one caveat to my taking time off was if Chris Nolan called.
Called a director, he's very direct. And it's why everything, like you said, Matt, by the time I got to set, you said, Downey, everything happens in front of the camera. You're going to love this.
This is a peculiar way that Chris works. You don't see a frame of the film while you're shooting. There's no video village, there's no monitors, there's no playback, which is weirdly liberating. You know, you're never reflecting, you're just moving forwards all the time.
I think the other thing that shows what an amazing filmmaker that Christopher Nolan is just the amazing ensemble that want to be in this movie. There's so many big actors or well-known faces who pop up in this movie for one or two scenes because they want to be in a Christopher Nolan movie. Rami Malek plays a tiny role in this, and he's been in some big roles the last few years, and apparently he was on set for one day. Then you got Gary Oldman was in there for one scene, Kenneth Branagh is in there for a couple of scenes, and just everybody's lining up to work with Nolan either again or for the first time. Even faces like Josh Peck popping up in this one, Josh Hartnett popping up in this one. Everybody in this movie is phenomenal. Even Alden Ehrenreich, I believe is his name, Han Solo 2, he pops up in this movie, and he's fantastic in the movie as well. I don't think there's a bad performance in the entire movie.
Now the race is against the Soviets.
Not unless we started.
Robert, they just fired a starting gun.
One thing that had me skeptical going into the movie is the runtime. It's 3 hours long. That's a big commitment. But what I will say is the first 2 hours in particular, all the way up to actually making the bomb and then delivering the bomb, that time just flew by. I believe that I was around the 2 hour mark. Might have been later, might have been a little bit shorter. But that time absolutely flew by. I remember thinking to myself, it feels like I've only been here for about 10 minutes because you just get sucked in and captivated by the story and the fantastic storytelling and the performances and the music and the sound effects. It all blends so brilliantly together.
All America's industrial might and scientific innovation connected here. A secret laboratory.
They even went out to the desert and built an entire town for this movie, replicating Los Alamos.
I always try to use real locations as much as possible. With location shooting or sets, the more things can just be real, the better they're going to feel to the audience.
We built our Los Alamos at Ghost Ranch, New Mexico, which is along the same mountain range that Los Alamos proper sits on. This was very important, and I based all of this on research. We built all of these buildings 360. We want it to feel like you are right there, you are in this is happening, this is real. This isn't a backlot.
With a phenomenal interview with Brian Cox, I believe it's for Esquire UK, Christopher Nolan talked about why some of the movie is in black and white and some of it's in colour.
In particular, the black and white colour is to help orient the audience in the structure of the story. The story is structured with, two threads. The most significant thread being the colour, which is Oppenheimer's very subjective point of view. Really is an attempt to jump into his head, see the world the way he saw it, and wind up with understanding rather than judgment. Contrasting with that, we have a black and white thread that is more the point of view of Robert Downey Jr.'s character, Louis Strauss. And I want to use the color in the black and white to help just make the audience feel the scenes as different, because one is a much more objective view of Oppenheimer. You're sort of seeing him from across the room and perhaps judging him a little more, and the other, you're really in his head kind of going on the journey with him.
This is a super interesting thing within the movie, because it's something I noticed watching the movie. In the black and white scenes, which from Strauss' point of view, majoritively, Oppenheimer had this different demeanor. He came across more like an asshole, more arrogant. And then in the color scenes, he was a bit more down to earth, laid back, focused on his work. It was very well portrayed in the movie. Another scene which captivated my attention in this movie, I thought was truly phenomenal filmmaking and shows the power of simplicity, is the scene with the apple at the beginning of the movie. Oppenheimer poisons an apple with cyanide, leaves it on his teacher's desk. He wakes up panicked and tries to race back to the classroom before the professor eats the apple. And when he gets there, Kenneth Branagh is holding it. And we get that tense scene where Kenneth Branagh is talking to Cillian Murphy and he's about to take a bite from the apple and he just snatches the apple and throws it away. It was a very simple scene, but it was very well done. Good use of music, sound effects, just some fantastic acting overall, and a simple story device, and they get the absolute most out of it. It was a fantastic little scene to set the tone of the movie. But perhaps that scene was put in there also to show that Oppenheimer had this craziness to him. He had this wild side to him. You've also got the whole thing towards the end of the movie where they're talking about how he was a womanizer, and we saw all the stuff with Florence Pugh and the relationship they had, and he's already got a wife with Emily Blunt. But then towards the end of the movie, they're like, he also had a relationship with this other woman that you saw for 5 minutes earlier in the movie. Oppenheimer is definitely a divisive character, and that's very much portrayed in the movie. He's not portrayed as a super good guy who was hard done by the government. They do show a little bit of that, and maybe you could argue there's a little bit bias towards that, but there's also the whole thing of he created a weapon that destroyed so many people. He created a moment in history where with a push of a button, the entire atmosphere of the planet could have been destroyed. Life on Earth could have been done with the push of a button, and he still pushed the button.
We had a moment where it looked like the chain reaction from an atomic device might never stop.
Are we saying there's a chance that when we push that button, we destroy the world?
Chances are near zero.
Near zero.
What do you want for theory alone?
Zero would be nice.
One thing I did wonder, once he's delivered the bomb, at the time I was thinking, did they shy away from the actual dropping of the bomb? They didn't show the bomb being dropped, didn't show the devastation or the horror that happened in arguably one of the worst events in the history of humanity. I later realized it comes back to what Christopher Nolan has talked about, why the movie's in black and white in some sections and why it's in color in some sections. This movie's majoritively being told from Oppenheimer's perspective, or from Robert Downey Jr.'s character Levi Strauss, his perspective. So it's from one or two perspectives, and those characters didn't see the devastation firsthand. Their first encounter of what actually happened on the ground was weeks later, and we only see Oppenheimer's reaction to that weeks later, then in flashes of his guilt. So when I initially left the movie theater, I was questioning why didn't they show that visually, and from a storytelling point of view and from a filmmaking point of view, it could have been a fascinating part of the movie. Christopher Nolan clearly felt it wasn't necessary, and he was perhaps right. The movie skips forward then to the aftermath of what happened, not necessarily in Japan, but more on the ground in America, and with Oppenheimer himself, how he was hung out to dry by the government and by Strauss. And even the whole thing with Strauss, his whole ambition, how he was blinded by ambition, thought everyone was against him and Oppenheimer was against him, when in reality they didn't really give a shit. One thing I was fascinated with in this movie is the use of sound in particular. Especially in the likes of the Trinity test, there was moments where the entire air was sucked out of the room and all you could hear is the people's breathing. And everybody in the movie theater I was in was just silent, just paying attention, just captivated by what they were seeing. And it was a fantastic moment in cinema. And then you've got the whole thing they did very cleverly in the Trinity test, the use of silence. The use of silence can be just as impactful as really good sound effects if done correctly. So you think everything's cleared, the bomb's gone off, you're just settling back into your seat, ready for the rest of the story, and then bang, the huge explosion hits you. And depending on the movie theater you're in, it was going to hit you a little bit harder than it would in some. And that's just some of the fantastic sound design. I was a bit too complacent and thinking, okay, moving on now, the explosions happened, and then bang, aftershock. which just goes to show even further level of detail that Christopher Nolan goes in with these movies.
You are the man who gave them the power to destroy themselves. And the world is not prepared.
The events that took place within this movie, which actually took place in real life, changed the world forever. We now live in a world where there is always that possibility that those bombs, or bombs like it, or bigger ones based on that original design, could go off and we're all screwed. Which comes evident at the end of the movie, where Oppenheimer's having visions of the future and missiles going off. The scary idea, and perhaps the reason why a lot of people were leaving the movie in stunned silence at the end of it. So ultimately, Oppenheimer was a fantastic, very interesting movie, which on first viewing needs more viewing. Unfortunately for me, my nearest 70mm IMAX movie theater is all the way up in Dublin, about an hour and a half away. I'm going to try to go see it in that format because I know it'll just elevate the movie even further, and I'm probably going to go see it a couple of more times just to try to see all the details in it. This is definitely a movie you need to see in a movie theater. Last year I didn't go see Top Gun Maverick in a movie theater, and I felt I missed out on that movie. And that movie pales in comparison to this movie. So, you know, don't miss out with Oppenheimer. Even if you're not a big fan of history, even if you don't know the events of the movie, I didn't know a lot of them. I didn't know much about them at all. And I took so much away from this movie. It's a fascinating movie, expertly told by an expert filmmaker. And who knows, maybe he won't make one this good ever again, because Christopher Nolan has made some stinkers as well as some phenomenal movies.
We made Oppenheimer on the largest scale possible because the idea is to come and experience this. His story is monumental and epic and extraordinary. It really has to be seen on the big screen to be believed.
So ultimately we get down to a rating out of 10, like always here on Karl's Movie Film Show, and for me, Oppenheimer was a 9. So, hey guys, I'm Karl from the future, editing this video, and I just realized something. I gave it a 9 out of 10, and I'm not happy with that. So I'm going to change that to 9.75 out of 10, just to be different. So, back to the video. I'm being harsher and harsher with the 10s because, you know, I've been a bit loose with the ratings. At times, for me, it's one of the best movies of the year. Is it the best movie of the year? We'll have to find out at the end of the year.